Hello, I'm Dr. Younger. I'm director of the Neuroinflammation, Pain, and Fatigue Laboratory. And here's the question for today. Can we filter diseases out of the blood? Specifically, can we filter ME/CFS or myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and long COVID out of the blood? And that was a question that was asked by two papers that were released very recently. And I want to cover these. They used clinical apheresis, which is blood filtering, and they used that to reduce the severity of these diseases. Now, this is not a new idea. We've used therapeutic apheresis for decades. It's similar in principle to dialysis, but you're just removing different parts of the blood. You can you basically, with apheresis, you put an IV in one arm, you pull the blood out of the body, you run it through a centrifuge to separate it into the parts of the blood, and then you take out what you want to remove, whatever is causing the problem, or the part of the blood where that problem molecule is, and then you return everything back to the body via the IV in the other arm. So you filtered everything out, you've put everything back, and if you've removed the correct molecule, the person should feel better. Now, this is used mostly for autoimmune disorders, particularly really rare and really severe autoimmune disorders. So you can use this process to remove the autoantibodies that are attacking your system and then return the cleaned blood. And that can have very drastic and quick effects, like just in a few hours, the person can feel much, much better. So it's a very important clinical tool. So of these two papers, one of the papers reported on using apheresis for long COVID, and the other one reported using this technique for ME/CFS. Of the two papers, I'm going to talk about the one that looked at long COVID. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it was in 20 people. The other paper was a case study on one person. And we have the hierarchy of evidence in science where a study done in one person, again, a case study, we don't have a lot of confidence in those results because you can't know how generalizable effects are when it's only tested in one person. So that's the lowest level of clinical evidence. A study with 20 people is a little bit above that. So we have a tad bit more confidence in a small 20-person study. So I'm going to focus on the long COVID paper with the more people. The stories are very similar between the two papers. Now, by the way, this is an open access paper, which is great, which means you can get the full paper. It's not a long paper, and it's, with the exception of an explanation of the autoantibodies, it's a fairly easily digestible paper. I think most people would get the basic story by reading, especially the most important parts. So it's open access. I'm putting a link in the description. So let's take a look at it. It's called a single center pilot study of therapeutic apheresis in patients with severe post-COVID syndrome. So they're calling it post-COVID syndrome. I usually call it long COVID. There's other names for it as well. This was done by a German group. They looked again at 20 patients with this post-COVID syndrome. We're basically talking about profound fatigue, musculoskeletal pain, problems with concentration, reduced physical activity, and post-exertional malaise, where when you exert yourself physically or mentally, there's an exacerbation of your symptoms. Now, what they were targeting in the study was beta 1 and beta 2 autoantibodies, and these are beta adrenergic receptors. I'm not going to go into this very much, just a little bit so we can understand what they're trying to do. So there are autoantibodies. Autoantibodies are antibodies that are attacking your own system, and there are autoantibodies for your beta adrenergic receptors. When you have antibodies attacking your adrenergic receptors, you're going to cause problems with cardiac function, and that's going to impair the ability to get adequate oxygen to your brain, and it will probably cause problems with postural changes and activity changes as well. So they're hypothesizing that ME/CFS is caused by antibodies attacking your adrenergic receptors, affecting your heart and other parts of your cardiovascular system. So they wanted to use apheresis to filter out these autoantibodies. That's the basic story. Pretty straightforward. So again, 20 people. There were 13 women, 7 men, and they did 5 apheresis treatments. So 1 a week for 5 weeks. I don't think they said how long the treatments are, but I think they can be done in an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So it's not a really big deal for the patient. You just, again, you have an IV in one arm, IV in another arm, sit there for an hour. We do double IVs all the time in lots of different medical and scientific protocols. Not a big deal. Sit there, watch TV, read a book, and then it's over. So after the 5 weeks, let's take a look at what they found. So first of all, let's look really quickly at the effects on the autoantibodies that they wanted to filter out. So I guess the first question is, did they successfully get rid of those antibodies? And we see here that they did. At the top are the beta 1 autoantibodies, and at the bottom are the beta 2 autoantibodies. And we saw that both are significantly reduced. So it seems to have done what they hoped the treatment would do. So we'll get past that. So again, they removed the autoantibodies. The real question is, did the participants, patients, feel better? And when we look at that, we see that the response looks pretty good for all the symptoms. You can see here there's improvements of pain and fatigue and different symptoms. What I focus on here is the physical activity, which I'm highlighting here in the circle. It looks like most of the participants felt much better after this treatment, and this line going down means that they had less restrictions on their physical activities. This is basically saying they're self-reporting that they were able to do more things, and that at the end of the day is really what we want to do. Of course, when we're trying a treatment, we want to get rid of their pain and fatigue, but really what we're trying to do is get them in a position where they can do more of the things that they want to do. And so I'm heartened by this finding that it seems like physical activity in particular was improved by this treatment, but really kind of eyeballing all the different graphs, they all look pretty good to me. So I would say in general, this looks like a good clinical response in most of the participants, but definitely not all of them. Some of them clearly didn't get better. And then in some cases, there were, maybe a couple people who even got a lot or a little bit worse. So it's definitely not a cure-all or something that works in all participants. Now, the strangest thing about this paper is I can't find statistics on the clinical improvements. And I've looked at the front page, I've looked at the back, I've looked at the fine print. I can't find it. And I apologize if I missed it, but there's statistics for the autoantibody changes, but there's no statistics for the improvements in symptoms. And that is perplexing to me. I don't understand it. The data are the same in both cases. In the autoantibodies and in the clinical signs of improvement, they're both pre-post in the same number of people. So if they did statistics without antibodies, why didn't they do it with the clinical stuff? So when we see some people improve, did they definitely improve? Did they improve in a statistically significant way? I can't determine that because they don't report the statistics on that. So I don't understand the exclusion of stats. As soon as I'm done recording this, I will send an email to the authors and I will ask them if they can, if they have a good quick explanation. And if they get back, again, they won't have a lot of time to do that. But if at any time in the next few days, they come back and say, oh, the reason why is because this, I'll put that explanation in the description or I'll pin it as a comment. So we'll see. But that raises my suspicion or concern level a bit because it's an interesting omission, but maybe they have an explanation. I can't guess at what that would be. All right, enough of that. Other limitations. Biggest limitation of this is that it didn't assess long-term effects. Now, apheresis might last for a year or it might last for a week. Those are both things that we see depending on the condition that's being treated. And really it comes down to how fast the offending molecules are being regenerated in your body because you've taken them out, but the parts of your body that are producing these autoantibodies are going to keep producing them. And so a lot of antibodies are produced by cells that are produced in the bone marrow. And so as long as you have your bone marrow, it's going to start it's going to start producing those things again in most cases. And so I would have loved to have known how long this 5-week treatment lasted. We don't know from this paper. I think it would have been pretty easy to just say, hey, in 3 months, we're just going to give you a quick call and we're going to ask you a few questions to see if you still feel better. But they didn't do that. Hopefully in the next study, they'll look at the durability of the clinical response, because that is really important. Like if it's something that lasts 6 months, wow, I mean, that would be great. If it's something that lasts a week, that's not as exciting. So duration of the clinical effect is really important for things like this, where you have to go into a clinic and get hooked up and sit there for an hour. It's a really important thing. So that's one limitation. Another limitation, the authors note this, there's no control group. So there's no one with what we call a sham apheresis device, where it makes you think it's taking your blood out and centrifuging it, or taking it out and putting it back in without doing anything. It's possible to do that, but it's a bit complicated. So they probably didn't have the budget to do that. So I understand that. Nonetheless, without a control group, we don't know how much of the clinical improvement was due to placebo effect or expectancy. When you're doing this really involved treatment and it makes sense, and you're like, oh, it's going to filter out all these things that are causing my symptoms, that can have a profound psychological effect. And we know that when you're looking at things like pain and fatigue, you can almost never interpret results unless you have a control group. And that's the case with this as well. Now, they did show that there was a reduction of the autoantibodies, the adrenergic autoantibodies, and there was an improvement of symptoms. And they're linking those two things. And they're like, well, we don't think it's placebo because we see these autoantibodies reduce. But just because the antibodies went down and the symptoms went down, that doesn't mean those two things are connected. It could have been, yes, the antibodies went down, but the improvement of symptoms may still be placebo. So they're going to have to link those two things together before we can really start recommending this treatment. Another thing is the general approach of apheresis takes a lot of stuff out of your blood. So you separate out the plasma and then you take a lot of molecules out. So classic apheresis isn't targeted. So you're not taking out specific things from the blood. You're taking out everything that's within this window of molecule size. And so you're getting rid of not just what they were targeting, which were the adrenergic autoantibodies. They're taking out a lot of molecules. They're taking out other antibodies. They're taking out pro-inflammatory cytokines and a lot of other signaling molecules. And so even if the apheresis was what improved their condition, that doesn't mean that it had anything to do with the adrenergic autoantibodies. That was what they were interested in seeing, but it could have been interleukin 6 or something else that was actually pulled out as well. There are things that were pulled out during this filtration process that I would think would have a better chance of causing improvement than what they were looking at. So now, fortunately, there is a technique called immunoabsorption that is a more advanced form of apheresis, where you pull the blood out and then you use clinical antibodies to take out specific molecules. So you can do it in a much more targeted fashion. More complex, fewer groups can do it, but it is something that's available. And so once we know exactly what's causing the symptoms, then we can just go in, take out that one offending molecule type, and then return everything else back to the body. And that would be less invasive. So instead of taking out a whole lot of different things that can have unpredictable effects on the body, you're taking out just the thing that's causing the problem. So I'd love to see some studies that are more targeted using the more advanced forms of apheresis. So should you try this for yourself? This is largely untested, especially for ME/CFS and Long-COVID. There are adverse events, very, very rare to have serious adverse events, but there are symptoms and downsides to doing this process. You have to do it multiple times in most cases. It's not easy probably to find a clinic. I note that both of the papers are from German groups. It's just common sense suggesting to me that it's more popular in Germany. So your ability to find a clinic that's willing to do this for long COVID or ME/CFS will differ substantially from country to country. In the United States, I don't know if there are clinics that do it for these conditions. There's certainly hospitals and clinics that have the equipment and they do apheresis. I just don't know if they do it for these conditions that we're talking about today. They usually do it for severe autoimmune disorders, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. The cost, I have no idea how much this costs. Not really my field to look into things like that. I seriously doubt insurance would handle this. Again, for ME/CFS and long COVID, there are life-threatening illnesses where they will cover therapeutic apheresis. I really doubt they'll cover it for these conditions. Usually they cover things like this when it's considered to be medically necessary. And before they can make that determination for these conditions, there'll have to be a lot more research. So I imagine this will be mostly out-of-pocket expense. And then if you combine that with what I said earlier, which is we don't know how long it lasts and how often you'll have to do the treatment, it could very easily be something that would be just inaccessible for most people. It could be too expensive. If it's something where you could do a couple treatments and it lasts a year, you could probably afford it. But if you have to go back every couple of weeks, that could be prohibitively expensive. So taking all that together, I would say it's too early to try apheresis for long COVID or ME/CFS or fibromyalgia or Gulf War illness or the other conditions that we study. It's interesting. It might ultimately, in fact, it makes a lot of sense. Both common sense, it makes scientific sense. Yeah, if we think that these conditions are caused by inflammation or autoimmunity, then yeah, if you take it out of the blood, that's going to make them feel better for a while. So it's not surprising to me that this has promise. But what exactly do we need to take out? And what should we leave in when we're doing this filtration? That's really, I think, the big question. And again, how long does it last? So again, I think it's too early for most people to try it. But if you're severely affected by one of these conditions and nothing else has worked and you've been to the subspecialists, the experts, your primary care physician has given up, they're like, we tried everything and we don't know what to do, then I think this is something to consider or something to ask your physician about possibly trying. Again, I don't know how accessible it is or where you are in your area, but it is something that can be done. It's one of the tools that we can use against these diseases, and it works very differently from the other things you probably tried. So it could be very beneficial for that reason. So definitely something I want to watch. I look forward to seeing larger studies and hopefully more targeted studies that clearly find the kind of driving pathological molecule. That would be really exciting and making this something that's more of a mainstream treatment for ME/CFS and long COVID. So that's it. I hope that's interesting to you, and I hope you have a good week. And I will be back next week with some more scientific stuff to present. Bye.